Today I want to talk about comets. Hey everybody, I'm Kevin J. Railsback from Nature Photo Studios, and I want to talk about comets today because they say that in a person's lifetime they only have the opportunity to maybe observe 5 amazing comets. The last amazing comet that I saw was almost a quarter century ago, Comet Hale-Bopp. And right now there's another comet in the night sky that is shaping up to be a really amazing comet. Now in the past week, I've been out photographing it every morning because it's only been visible in the pre-dawn light. But starting this week, you can start to see the comet in the evening right after sunset. So it's a great opportunity for you to get out and see and photograph this comet. So I want to kind of take you through the process I've been going through the last few days to try to get a really good image of the comet. So I checked online to find out approximately where the comet was going to be, and it said that it was going to be fairly low on the horizon. So I found a spot near the campground that I was at that had a great view of the northeastern horizon. So I took my Nikon D500 and the 200 to 500 millimeter lens because I didn't know how much magnification I was going to need to really capture the comet. Now I've tried photographing comets in the past and they've really been disappointing. The last comet that I photographed was dubbed the Christmas comet. And you could barely see the comet. It just looked like a little teeny small green fuzzball. Actually, the image that I took of it, the moon is actually more impressive than the comet was. So I took my Nikon D500 with a 200 to 500 millimeter zoom. The D500 is a crop sensor camera, so at 500 millimeters, it was actually going to be about 725 millimeters. So I took a couple test images and I saw that at 500 millimeter, I couldn't get all of the comet in the viewfinder. So I went back down to 200 millimeters and I was able to get some pictures of the comet, which was really exciting for me because like I said, it's been a quarter of a century since the last time I saw a really good comet. The problem was with the 200 millimeter on a crop sensor camera is that I only could capture the comet. There really wasn't anything in the image for reference. So the next day I went back out and sadly there were clouds on the horizon. I couldn't see the comet at all. So I went back into the camper and for whatever reason in about a half hour or so, I decided to go back out and I could see the planet Venus right from the door of my camper. Now, currently the comet is a little bit to the left of Venus. So if you can see Venus, you can see the comet. And it really kind of surprised me because I thought I had to have a lower horizon line to be able to see the comet. But I could actually see the comet right from my camper. So I ran back outside and this time I had the Nikon D780 with the 135 millimeter f2 defocus control lens. Now this is kind of a quirky lens. I don't know of a lot of people that use it, but I actually love this lens because it gives a very organic look. You know, sometimes you want an image that is just super, super sharp, almost they call it kind of like electronic sharp. But a lot of times in nature, I really like an organic look to my images, and this 135 f2 defocus control lens gives me that look. So it's really one of my favorite lenses that I love to use. And the Nikon D780 is a full frame camera. So I had a little wider depth, not depth of field, but I had a wider angle of view with this setup so I could include some of the trees and some of the clouds that were low on the horizon to capture the comet. And I was really pleased with the way that image turned out. So now the next night I went back out again just right outside my camper because I knew I could see the comet from that spot. And I took my Nikon D780 with the 135, but I also took my Nikon D850 with the 80 to 200 2.8 because I wanted to see if I could get a little bit bigger view of the comet, but still include some of the trees. Now, as the comet is going past the sun, it's rising higher and higher in the sky. So around 3:30 or so, it would come up above the tree line, and then it would slowly rise up. But the problem is that the sun is also rising at the same time. So you really have a limited amount of time that you can capture the comet before the sunlight washes out everything. So with the 200, I really couldn't see anything but the comet. So I took some vertical shots and I could just get the top of the tree line, but it was still amazing just to see the comet. So my favorite images were taken on the Nikon D780 with the 135mm f2 lens, because that gave me a wider field of view and could really put the comet in the context of the landscape. So you may ask, well, why didn't I use even a wider lens, a 50mm or a 24mm? The problem with that is that the wider of a lens you use, the smaller the comet is going to be. So when I had the 200mm lens on the D500, which is a crop sensor camera, the comet was nice and big, but there wasn't anything else in the image to really give it context against the landscape. So if I used like a 50mm lens or 24mm lens, I could get even more landscape, which would be amazing, but the comet would be so small that it almost would seem insignificant to me. And since this is turning out to be such an amazing comet, I didn't want to not really be able to see the comet with a wider angle lens. So the 135 was kind of a good compromise. Maybe I could have gone a little bit wider, but I think the 135 was the perfect lens for me. Now, the one thing about shooting in the pre-dawn morning is the condensation, especially here in eastern Iowa. The second day that I went out, the humidity was at 65%, and I can't remember what the temperature was. A cold front came through, so I think it was in the 70s. And by the time I was finished shooting the comet, the lens on my 135mm had fogged over with condensation. So if I was going to do this again in high humidity, I would definitely get a dew heater for the lens. A dew heater just plugs into a USB power bank and warms up the lens just enough so that dew or condensation doesn't form on the lens. I'll throw a link down below to the one I use. So many of you probably don't want to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to photograph this comet. The nice thing is, starting this week, the comet will be visible in the evening sky shortly after sunset. Now I'll put a animation of the comet around sunset as of today until it sinks below the horizon. And I'll also put a animation of the comet on July 23rd around sunset until it sinks below the horizon as well. So it's going to be much easier to see and photograph the comet. The problem is that the comet is now moving away from the sun. The farther it gets away from the sun, the dimmer the comet is going to be. So the sooner you can get out to see or photograph this comet, the better it'll be, because it is as bright as it's going to be right now. In fact, I've read a couple reports already that says that this morning it was already dim enough that you couldn't see it with the naked eye in some of the spots that you could previously. So this comet was bright enough that I could see it with my naked eye, which was really impressive to see it just kind of hanging out there in the northeast sky. But as time goes on, the comet is going to get dimmer. So I really encourage you to get out as soon as you can, as soon as the weather cooperates. In the evening, it's going to be in the northwest sky. If you look at the animation that I put up, you can see about where it's going to be. It's really easy to find. It's really easy to photograph. So get out there and at least look at it if you don't go out and photograph it. You really don't need a fancy camera setup to photograph this. Most of my exposures were anywhere from 1 second to I think maybe 8 seconds was the longest exposure that I had. ISO ranged from like 160 to I think maybe 1600 ISO when it was real early in the morning, like 3:30 before dawn really started kind of creeping in. So you don't need a super fast lens. I did shoot most of mine wide open just because I wanted to try to minimize the movement of the comet and the stars. So I wanted as fast a shutter speed as I could. But if you have like an f4 lens or something like that, it's going to work just fine. You may get a little star movement and blurry, but it's not going to be anything significant that is going to, make it not worth getting out and photographing this thing. So like I said earlier, they say most people only get to see about 5 amazing comets in their lifetime. This is one of them right here. So I really encourage you to go out and see this comet, try to take some images, and let me know in the comments below how it went for you.